Today we're checking out Canon's newest RF lens, the 75-300 f4 to 5.6. But here's the catch. This actually isn't even a new lens. This lens is over 25 years old. Now I'm gonna get into that in a minute, but first up, let's go over the specs and take a look at this lens. So like I said, this is a 75-300mm lens, and it does cover full frame. So this lens will work on any RF camera, whether it's the R5, R8, or something like a crop sensor, R7, R50, R50V. And it has a maximum aperture of f4 on the short end to f5.6 on the long end, which actually is surprisingly fast for a budget RF zoom lens like this. You know, even something like the RF 100-400, which is an extremely underrated lens. That lens is 3 times the price of this, and it has an aperture of f5.6 to f8. So substantially slower aperture versus this lens. However, this lens doesn't have any form of stabilization built into it, which is a pretty big downside that we're gonna get into. For the size and dimensions, this lens is just over 6 inches long, but it does extend all the way to almost 9 inches. But this is a pretty light lens at only 507 grams. So it will feel pretty light and not very front heavy, even for being kind of as long as it is. And then lastly for the specs, this has a 58mm filter thread up front here, but it will rotate when this lens focuses. So just keep in mind if you have like a gradient filter or, you know, some type of filters just might not work very well when the front lens literally twists along with the focus. And really in general, rotating front elements like this are only in extremely budget lenses. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the specs. I'm sure you've seen some example photos by now, but here's the catch. This brand new lens from Canon is essentially identical to the 1999 Canon EF 75-300mm f4 to 5.6 Mark III. The exact same design, the exact same autofocus motor, the exact same optical performance as the over 25-year-old EF version of this lens, just rehoused in a slightly better looking newer shell and extended a little bit to fit the RF mount. Everything else about this lens is exactly identical to a 26-year-old Canon lens. But that's not even all. The worst part is that that lens, when it was released, was already known as not a very good lens. In fact, it was actually rated optically one of the worst EF lenses at the time. Think about just how much optics and lenses and technology in general have improved since then. And even back then, it was rated one of the worst lenses. This release from Canon seriously just does not make any sense other than being a blatant cash grab and trying to mislead people that just don't know any better. They basically put absolutely zero effort into re-releasing this lens that was already such a bad lens, just because they know it's cheap enough that people would just buy it without even thinking about it, without looking into it, and they'll make a ton of money off it. That's the only reason I can see Canon ever deciding to re-release this lens. Now I quickly want to go over some more of the downsides of this, and I'm obviously going to show a bunch of photo examples, and I'm not trying to point this out as like a blatant scam. I think there is still technically a market of people that'll purchase this lens and it'll work fine for them and they won't think anything of it. But I do think 99% of people should at least know all this before even considering this lens, even if it is something that you still might want to purchase. This lens is super soft on a full frame camera. It's even softer on a crop sensor camera, which is what most people are going to use this on. The autofocus is very loud and slow. Like, I really can't believe an RF lens has this loud and just bad of an autofocus system on it. Overall, this definitely struggles with autofocus, which really isn't a surprise since, like I said, they've literally put the same autofocus motor they had in the original version from 1999. So really just another questionable choice from Canon when they decided to make this lens again. I also just want to show you how loud the autofocus motor is real quick, because it's like actually crazy how loud it is. It would make it pretty much unusable for recording video with an on-camera mic. Okay, I'm gonna get my mic a little closer so you can hear it a little better. Yeah, this is the loudest autofocus motor I've ever heard in a lens. Also, the lack of stabilization in this lens at this focal range makes it pretty difficult to get sharp, you know, not blurry images at long focal lengths. And that also makes this lens very difficult for video. You know, again, especially at that long range, it's gonna be pretty impossible to record any handheld video with this lens unless you have a Canon camera with in-body image stabilization. So pretty much besides the lack of sharpness, the lack of stabilization is one of the biggest downsides of this lens. Okay, another pretty annoying thing, the close focus distance on this lens is not very good. So right now I'm trying to focus on these flowers right here, and the closest focus distance, this is the closest I can get and stay in focus with those. So that's another thing that'll kind of catch you off guard, is just how bad the close focus distance is with this lens. I do think there are a lot better options out there, even if you have to purchase like a $50 EF to RF adapter and buy a used EF lens for this. And so I'm actually gonna link a couple better options that are at a really similar price point to this, if you're willing to purchase them used, and if you're willing to use an EF to RF adapter. So if you're in the market for this lens, if you have a similar budget to what this is, which is, just over $200, definitely check out the other lenses I linked down in the description that'll be at a similar price point, but perform a lot better than this. They'll have stabilization, they'll be a lot sharper. They just might be a little bit bigger and bulkier and, slightly different design or slightly different focal lengths. So definitely check those out if you're in the market for this lens and just don't really know which way to go. But also, if you do have the extra budget or if you can save up for it, the RF 100 to 400 is just one of the most underrated lenses on the RF mount. I made a whole video about this. I actually have a couple of videos about this lens. This is definitely one of my favorite RF lenses, and I know for a fact it's my most used RF lens. But it's also about 3 times the price of this one. This comes in at, I think $600 to $700 brand new. You can obviously save some money if you buy it used, which I'll link that down in the description as well. If you can save up a little bit more to splurge on this lens, I would highly, highly recommend picking this up. But again, this is still 3 times the price of this lens. So while I'm not gonna recommend this lens to anybody, I do 100% understand that there is a very small target market that will enjoy this lens, that won't think anything of it, and that'll just enjoy the photos coming out of it. If that's you, I will link this down in the description, but for everybody else, please consider something else. Please at least look into your other options, or watch a few more reviews of this and look at a bunch more examples before you decide to pull the trigger on it, because this just isn't a very good lens. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, I can't make this up. I just got a comment on a YouTube short, the unboxing I made about this lens, while I'm filming this, saying basically that they purchased this and they were so upset. It was the worst decision they've ever made, and they said, please make a buyer beware video. Like, it seriously isn't just me complaining about this lens. So please do your own research before you decide to purchase this lens. I'm not saying nobody should buy it, but please do your research and just make sure it's something that will actually work for you.